next presenter for today is Dr. Sara Ohadi, PhD, who is a weed scientist working at the interface of ecology, biology, and genetics of weeds and invasive species. Her primary research goal is to develop integrated pest management, or IPM, solutions by combining basic and applied scientific knowledge. Her current research focuses on understanding the extent of early season algal bloom in California rice and developing a time-specific management approach. I now request Dr. Sara Ohadi to please start your presentation and share your screen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Like probably many people from different places in the world are watching this great group of people who are kindly gathered together to make these public talks for all the audiences who are interested in science. And I would be so glad that I can explain some of my current research with you guys. And here's my PowerPoint. Okay. Yeah, I got my PowerPoint here. So my background actually in agriculture and weed science, but mainly most of my focus of my PhD and my previous research was in population genetics and genomics and molecular ecology of plants in natural habitats. And now I'm back to the field of plants, but I'm not working with the plants in the terrestrial system, and algae species or algae species, as you say, they have some similarities with the plants, but they are not actually plants. And I'm trying to learn things that learn about this community of genuses and species, and then apply whatever I know in the past into this system. So fairly my whole exposure to rice is in the past 2 years that I've joined Dr. Al-Khatib lab at UC Davis. And my focus of the research is on finding and developing mechanisms or a system for managing algae in the rice. Here I'm trying to show that, okay, so this is the perspective. This is something that we are aiming in our group in general. So the research group that we have at UC Davis, it's a small group which is specialized on managing weeds in rice. And the main objective is to incorporate different aspects of biology, ecology, genetics of weeds together, and then using different methods and tools that we have to manage the weeds and then provide a sustainable rice production. And as also Liberty mentioned, many of these things which are actually she's using this technique. So she's studying the biology of the weedy rice, looking at how they are germinating, how they respond to the water potential or temperature and environmental conditions. That's one of the examples of what we do in our research. Some of the other things that also she mentioned about the prevention and how we have to prevent our fields to remain cleaner, because the weeds are very nasty. So when they come to the field, they're gonna stay for a long time. They produce their seeds, they shed their seeds into the soil and develop a soil seed bank. And that soil seed bank can last for many years, and every year a part of those seeds are gonna germinate, and then this is gonna be a kind of lifestyle. So the more that we can keep the fields, our fields clean, so then we have a kind of a sustainable or better pest management program in future. The other parts of the things that we do many studies in our group related to the different aspects of cultivation and how it can be incorporated for decreasing the weed pressure. We do many research with the chemicals and herbicides that we have in our system. Also, like always, there's a big concerning about the herbicide resistant weeds. And this is a kind of a big challenge we're gonna encounter over time in any cropping industry in the world, I think. And as a part of a program, we actually provided some, like, this is not my area, but we do provide some services and educate the growers about the herbicide program that they can choose based on the potential resistance they might find in their fields. So, and how to use those, like how to use and those herbicides and chemicals in a most efficient way to reduce the escape of the weeds, and then decrease the chance of developing resistance. So with that, this is a kind of, it's very interesting. I really liked it. There are there are many weeds in rice, and many of them are universal. So everywhere you go in the rice field, there's gonna be one of these species, or like species can be found in rice. And basically they might have the same genus, but they're different species. But it's very interesting because to me, all the weed species, they just moved around the world by the crop. But and then the thing is that you can read all the name of the weeds that you can find in California in a list in terms of, and then classify them as grasses, broadleaf, and sedges. But what I'm working on, the green algae and cyanobacteria by themselves, they are so complex, and there are many of the species in a piece of land you can find. Like, I sampled a region in our field station study, and I found more than 90 species, 90 species in a small piece of land. So imagine that how many of green algae and cyanobacteria are existing in the world. There is estimation about 400,000 to 700,000 species or genus can be are existing everywhere in the world, and they are everywhere, like they can even find in the desert environment. So it's a very interesting to me and fascinating area of research, and I think it explored less than plants and other organisms. And I'm glad that being introduced to this research, and I'm glad that whatever I learned, I can kind of share that with with you guys. So Liberty, my colleague, my lab mate, she explained very well how the California rice system works. It is basically established on the historical shallow wetlands, and it is a part of, as a part of that ecosystem, like California rice during the winter, it's a kind of reservoir and reserve for many migratory birds that are traveling from north to west and vice versa of the America continent. And most of the field work start like in early spring. After the field preparation and the flooding the field, then the planes gonna be there actively. Liberty showed in her presentation that how they spread the seeds. Many of the spread the pre-germinated seeds of rice in the field. In addition, there's lots of other activities like spreading the fertilizers as a top dress, or herbicide application or pesticide application, also carried by those little planes that are flying on feet. And this is this is the time, when the beginning of the season, this is the time that we usually get the harmful bloom of algae, or I can say that the excessive growth of algae in rice, and where it gets the problem. And then that's a rice system in California, which is the unique things about is that all the things are automatically and it's done by the airplane, and it's a kind of continuous flooding till the harvest. And just showing this cartoon, I want to also mention about the role of ecosystems and how different elements in an ecosystem can be related to each other. It's a very simplistic way of things, but rice ecosystem, like many agroecosystems, have many different components from the human activity, birds, other plants, weeds, insects, pathogens, microbial community in the and there are multi-layers of the existing organisms are incorporating with each other that in that system. And the thing is that any changes in any of these factors, either it's a live organisms or biotic or abiotic uh, environmental conditions like water and like rain or fire these days that we have in California. So all of these things are influencing rice production, as well as it also influencing the other habitats, other occupants of these habitats, like the birds, plants, algae, microbial community, and everything. And some of these changes and the influences are very quickly can be seen. Some of them are a little bit take longer time to be visible. And for me, when I started with algae community, I realized that wow, they are so fast in responding to the environmental factors, and and by themselves, because they are not just one species, there are multiple of them together. They can be different shapes, different size, different forms, and they have different preferences. So when they get together and something is changing in the environment, the whole community can change together. And usually what you see and you hear about it, like they call it a tide, it is maybe dominated by one species, but usually it carries other species together, but the environmental condition and the situation just become favorable for one of them to take over. It is exactly the same thing is happening in the terrestrial environment with the weeds and the way that we manage our fields and what we select related to that one. But this is happening in a larger scale, but it's very quickly, like in a couple of days, lots of changes can happen to these communities during the rice growing season. And talking a little bit about what is actually algae and what is called algae. Well, algae is a kind of very general word, but it contains many different groups in it. We have golden algae, brown algae, green algae, and we have blue-green algae, which actually they are not algae, they are prokaryotic photosynthetic cells, so they are considered as bacteria, but that's an old name, which is still people use it as a kind of exchange. And this is in this picture, I wanted to show that why they call it, what's the difference for differences between cyanobacteria and algae cells. So on the left, you can see a cyanobacteria cell. Cyanobacteria, like that cell is by itself is like a chloroplast. And I know that many of people here are plant scientists, so they know better than me even the structure and shape of the chloroplast and the thylakoids by themselves. And then on the right, we have a kind of a very single cell, unicellular, flagellated chlamydomonas cell. And in that cell, you can see all the organelles are existing, like the chloroplast and thylakoids and Golgi bodies and everything. The only unique things about the green algae, especially the ones that they have flagellate and they are motile, is that they have organ or something called pyrenoids. So actually, it's a kind of light sensor that detects the intensity of light in the environment. So if it is a high light intensity in the environment, so those algae cells can change their location in the water body. So it's very interesting, like system, and I hope I could like share everything what I've learned to you guys. As I mentioned, one of the key characteristics of algae that led them to change and respond rapidly to the environmental condition is their reproduction, and they are able to reproduce vegetatively or through having asexual spores or sexual reproduction, and mainly because they do the vegetative and asexual reproduction, they are able to take over everything in a short period of time. And here, this is one of the very little experiment we did in the lab with growing and culturing Chlamydomonas algae in the tissue, in the media, and like in a very few, like in a couple of hours of like 120 hours, 100 hours, in that small flask, like only 30 milliliter of the media, we get a size of population of 6 million cells. So imagine how many of them are gonna be in a rice field or in the ocean or lake or pond if they grow and reach to that plateau of growth that you can see here. Going further, I also want to mention about the factors that cause algae to grow fast, and these are the like plants, they need light, water, temperature, and nutrient as the main requirements for their rapid and excessive growth. But one thing which is really important if we want to use these characteristics to know our species and then how to manage them is knowing about the nutrient. So it's a very old ecological concept that algae, like in the limnology and phycology, you hear about it a lot, that algae is a nutrient limited group of nutrient limited. It means that in a body of lake, the amount of the nutrient is very low. So then algae cannot grow fast or just taking over everything. And once you get a little bit, you add a little bit of nutrient, which most of the time is phosphorus and nitrogen, to the environment, they can take advantage of it and grow rapidly till to get to the maximum growth. And as I mentioned, like water is very funny to have it here, but also water can be used for the management perspective in rice. And this is the kind of media that algae grow in it, but not all algae need water to grow. There are some studies and cases that some species found in deserts that has the role of keeping the sand together and prevent the spread of the sand in the blown away. Going further, talking more about the impact of all these characteristics, these are like all the studies, but they are really good representative of how environmental factors can affect on growth and relatively fast growth of algae in a short period of time. And you can see on the right. So this study was done a long time ago, but this is a very famous dam in South Africa that always have the bloom of microcystis algae, which produce toxin. And this dam is a water source for many people living in the capital city. So therefore, it is important to know that how these species, like that species, can respond to the temperature. And as you can see, with the increase of the temperature, like algae love high temperature, and the photosynthetic capacity reach the max. It gets higher. The other characteristics of like the things that algae species love the most is the nutrient, and nutrient mainly phosphorus in the form of phosphorus and nitrogen. And as you can again see, this is another study was done on Lake Erie to understand that how different types of nutrient, like the formulation, like whether it's a nitrate or ammonium versus urea, and the presence of it into the lake water can change the population size and the growth of the algae species. And then you can see that how combination of both nutrients together or separate can change the algae growth and biomass. Again, this is this is another factor which is really important for algae growth, and this is a study was showing that two types of, so this is Chlorella vulgaris, which is very like well-known species in the world of algae. It has been used recently for biofuel production. So this, and sometimes it's very famous. Like, I mean, these days you can find it in the US in the grocery store, the powder, which is not known as superfood. And then on the right side, it's a diatom species, let's say freshwater diatom species, and both of them, so diatoms are group of algae that they have silica in their structure. So if you look at it, it's in their structure and have and it's like become like a kind of external part of their body that protect the cells from this protect the cells. And again, you see that the growth rate of algae can be really influenced by light, and in both species you can see once the temperature and light intensity increases, the growth rate per day increase, but then it gets to a maximum and again drop down. And the reason is that although like algae loves light, but that capacity of tolerating light is very lower compared to many of the terrestrial plants and crops we know. So if the light intensity in the environment is high, it could be fatal for algae. And many of the species, many of the species of algae, they have flagellates, so they are motile and getting help from that pyrenoids within their cell. They can detect the amount of light intensity in the environment, and they change their place from the surface of the water to the bottom of the water column, so they can manipulate, like they can decrease the amount of light they receive and protect themselves. Knowing all these things and going back to rice, and I just put it here to just remind that why I talked about these things, because as I mentioned, we always, if you want to have a good management program for an industry like rice and sustainable production, you need to know your species and environment and the behavior of it. And then with knowing these main components and very basic things, we can use them to help our rice production. So when I get to the first time I get to know